Russia has a holiday, May 9th, and that celebrates them winning World War II against the Nazis. So the West thinks that, Putin's going to try to make a grandstand in basically in Ukraine, taking out Mariupol, which would then link Crimea through the Donbass right into Russia. So they think that's his primary strategy. So what they are trying to do is deliberately poke the bear, so to speak, and they are trying to defeat him from claiming any kind of a victory by May 9th. So they are increasing the pressure on just about everything under the sun. And the West needs World War III. They just need it. I've said before that the real problem here is that they went to negative interest rates in 2014 in Europe. They have been unable to ever stimulate the economy, and Keynesian economics has completely failed. That if you increase the money supply, that would create inflation. You lower interest rates, that will stimulate the economy. All that has completely failed. The primary reason is that during the Great Depression, when Keynesian economics came to the forefront, the main player was the private sector. All right, government wasn't that big of a deal. Hoover was criticized for running balanced budgets. So today, the problem we have is that ever since World War II, governments have been running deficits year after year after year. And there's no intention of ever paying anything back. So the central banks have actually lost power. You can't they raise interest rates to stop inflation. It's not going to work. Because the government itself is the biggest borrower in the system now. So they raise interest rates to reduce spending or inflation. Does it actually cause politicians to spend less? The answer is no. They just, we'll just tax people more. That's all. That's, total, I would say, mismanagement of government on a global scale. But the problem now is that the central banks have no control over the economy. Add to this type of inflation, which is substantially different than a speculative boom. This is based upon shortages, because these morons also, did with the COVID and restrictions on just about everything. So lockdown. So you ended up destroying the supply chain. So, I tried to order a new refrigerator, and they said, oh, well, it's going to take months because the chips come from Thailand. You look at new cars, they're going over, what will you pay over a sticker price to get one? They're going on average about 5% over. So it's a question of shortages, not speculative boom. And everybody's doing it. I mean, when I go to the food store, there's some things I want are gone. So other things that are there, I buy extra of because the next time they may be gone. So everybody's increasing their hoarding, so to speak. And so we're getting into this type of inflation, which is shortages. So the official rate is 8.5% now, and that's very nice. But there's a lot of things that are basically, double price. Cars are going, you used to be able to negotiate a price down and you get maybe 10% off. Now they want 5% over. So is this really just 8.5%? That's the minimum average, really. And you have to look at everything here. So, you have the Biden administration trying to blame everybody under the sun but itself. This is the Putin inflation, etc. So what we have is that Europe, with its negative interest rates, they've wiped out all the pension funds. They need 8% to break even, not negative rates. So there isn't really a pension fund in Europe that is solvent at this stage in the game. So when Schwab is saying you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, he's trying to make it sound like we're doing this for you. But in reality, it's the European government which is collapsing. As they decline, if they end up defaulting, you're going to have millions of people down there with pitchforks, storming the parliaments. So to avoid that, they need war. And it's like Macron in France. I mean, his whole campaign is "you need me, Russia is coming," blah blah blah. All right. So they keep poking Russia dramatically. And I just published a piece. I mean, it's all propaganda. Oh, Zelensky, like some sort of hero. I mean, he's not. He could have saved his country. All he had to do was release the Donbass and Crimea, period. I mean, if you look at charts of the old Roman Empire or Russian Empire, the border was right there on the river on which Kiev is. So Eastern Ukraine was only given to them supposedly for administrative purposes during USSR. Khrushchev drew the border. So you have him suddenly saying, no, that's ours. And it's people should die for this, to take over places like the Donbass, which are historically always Russian, and it's a Russian population. They're not Ukrainian. So it's just, nonsense. And then you have Zelensky issuing an order saying that only, Ukrainian will be recognized as an official language. So, a third of the country is all Russian and they can't speak Russian. Then on top of that, he brings in religion. And he is kind of like doing what Henry VIII is doing, and basically seizing the Russian Orthodox Church and saying that, Moscow is no longer the head of the church. So it's kind of like, when the French seized Avignon and they moved the papacy up to there. So or Henry VIII saying that the Pope is no longer going to be the head of the church here in England. So it's this on the same level. So it's like whatever he can do to really piss off Russia is what he's doing.
I wanted to bring up this. It says, this is Broken Zero Hedge on Monday. And I'm looking at this and going, wait, Russia wants to pay its bond debt, and they're not going to allow them to do it so they can force them into default. So
correct.
It says that, here's the headline: Russia threatens legal action if U.S. Treasury forces it into a sovereign debt default. So they want Russia to default? Do they want to blame Russia? So they want to blame Russia for everything? And, oh, your pensions are gone? Russia. Is that it?
Yeah. Everything you can imagine they're doing to Russia is to cover their own ass, really. That's what's going on here.
And you think they're going to force them into a default?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, the Biden administration has deliberately destroyed the world economy. Even when Russia went into Crimea, Obama went to SWIFT and said, gee, we would like to take them out. And they said, no way. All right. There was some integrity there. You can't change the entire world global financial system into a political tool. But a new head of SWIFT took charge in 2019, and he agreed to do whatever the government tells him. Now the problem is, you kicked Russia out of SWIFT. You now have shown your cards, and China is going full boat now, full steam ahead to create its separate system. And then Putin comes out and says to the rest of the BRIC countries, see, you better set up your own system as well. So that's why I mean the financial global economy has been destroyed. All right, so SWIFT allow everybody to communicate, make transfer payments, etc. That's all come to an end. So globalization, as we've known it, has been deliberately destroyed. Now, the question is, do these people understand what they really were doing? Or is this absolute just stupidity? But you're not putting this back together again now.
Is this why you said when I first called, I said everybody thinks this is going to blow up? I mean, awful. Not just a little correction in the market. They think the wheels are going to come off. You had the global governance conference, I believe that's what you call it. One of the finance people there said, "Oh, we're going to have a new financial system." So, explain the 2 weeks. You think that in 2 weeks we could have a complete credit seizure and everything just fall on its face?
Pretty much. I mean, this is what you're looking at. They are pushing for this May 9th agenda.
And you think, wait, and so you think people's credit cards won't work? Businesses?
No. I mean, not here in the United States or something like that. But the global financial system has already been destroyed. So, you can't send like a wire to somebody if you got a relative in Russia. You can't send it. It's done. So I think when they're saying that, a new financial system, yes, because SWIFT has not done what it was supposed to do. So now the global economy is splitting. And it's only a question of when will China basically sever also the link, or do we sever it on?
So what happens to the U.S. dollar? I mean, do we have more inflation? Do things fall out of bed? Are we going to have a credit seizure? What happens here in America with this splitting of the global economy?
The U.S. dollar gets stronger because effectively you're looking at the prospect of World War III in Europe. So just like World War I and World War II, all the money comes here. And in fact, in 1896, the U.S. government was virtually bankrupt. That's when J.P. Morgan went and did a $100 million gold loan to bail out the U.S. Treasury. So by the end of World War I, the U.S. had already displaced Britain as the financial capital. By the end of World War II, the United States ended up with 76% of the entire world gold reserves. All right, that's why the dollar became the reserve currency. All right, so initially the dollar goes up, not down. All right, because everybody's, particularly Europe is at greatest risk of tanks running down the streets, etc. So anybody with half a brain over there starts moving their capital out. That's what they did for World War I and World War II. So initially the dollar goes up. And the capital concentrates in the United States, but that's probably at best going into 2024. So after that, things begin to change.
So what's the 2 week window? What happens in the next 2 weeks when you said
they're trying to push very, very hard
for war?
Not to necessarily declare. They're trying to provoke Russia from doing something to justify them for going in. Now, most people don't realize, but there is serious concern that the Biden administration is doing exactly what FDR did. You can even Google it. There was Senate hearings on FDR, and it started in 1945 after the war. Did he deliberately create World War II in the Pacific? Japan's energy came from the United States. He cut them off. He put in every sanction just as we were doing against Russia. He seized all their assets in the United States. Why people thought he was doing this deliberately, it turned out that the U.S. had broken the Japanese codes. And Truman even issued an executive order trying to protect that information, because the gist of it was that they knew Pearl Harbor was coming. He pulled all the main ships out. What he left there was from World War I to be blown up, and oh my God, we were attacked. And so they're kind of doing the same thing to Russia right now, talking about, all right, Sweden and Finland will join NATO, when they know he has said if that happens, it's war. So they're doing everything they possibly can, to kick Russia in the gut. They want Russia to invade. And this is basically necessary because of the fact that you're looking at they need to default, and they need an excuse to cover their own, mismanagement of everything. So it's not a coincidence. They sent Harris over to the Munich security conference. Why was she sent? That should have been the Secretary of State.
To blurt out Ukraine should be in NATO.
Yes, and I mean, look, I was told by people in Washington when she, came into office, they said she was unbelievably stupid. They said we have to show her a map where even places are. So this was her level of expertise on the international level, and then you send her to Munich. It should have been the Secretary of State. So. And then she would just say whatever somebody gave her on cue cards. So she stands up on February 20th and says, Ukraine should join NATO. That violates the 1991 Belgrade Agreement. And 4 days later, Russia, invades. Now, you have to understand, another thing most people don't know is that Ukraine, when the Soviet Union broke up, had more nuclear weapons than China.
Yeah, you said this before.
So, the Belgrade Agreement was they gave up all their nukes, returned them to Russia. NATO agreed not to invade, and Russia agreed not to invade, provided that Ukraine remained neutral. So for her to stand up, you should join, NATO, was a complete violation of the Belgrade Agreement.
And they knew it. Wasn't a mistake.
They knew. I mean, maybe she didn't know it, or whoever wrote it on a cue card and handed it to her to say this, knew what they were doing, in my opinion. You can't attribute this to all complete stupidity. And then saying, Russia invaded a sovereign nation. Not true. Ukraine, before, the Soviet Union, if you look at a map of Ukraine, it was to the left of the river where Kiev sits on. All the east was the Russian Empire. When the Soviet Union came, that was basically the situation. All right, and it was just Khrushchev which extended the border and drew it around and said, for administrative purposes, Kiev, you can report to Kiev. That was never their sovereign territory, and that's why the East is predominantly Russian. So it just seems absurd that you would put Ukrainian people, civilians, in a line of fire for what? To capture an area that's occupied by Russians historically? I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
So you think they want war in the next couple of weeks? I mean, they want Russia to invade. How
they want Russia to do something? Yes.
Russia said with Finland saying they're going to join NATO, and their response from I think one of the higher ups, I want to say the foreign minister, prepare for your country to be destroyed. I mean, look, Russia said, Finland, you join NATO and prepare for your country to be destroyed.
You have to understand, despite all the propaganda, Putin's this horrible person, etc. This is the way they sell war. They make you think the guy is absolutely, evil, in persona. It's not true. Putin is actually pretty moderate. What we have to be concerned about are the people behind Putin. That foreign minister who said that, he also, a number of them have come out threatening nuclear war. They are there, and they view that Putin has been too soft. And this is part of the problem. We have neocons as well. All right, and both sides have them, and all they ever want is war. You remove Putin, and we may end up with somebody far worse than you ever imagined. His number two in command, he came out and said that the great purge of Stalin was necessary. I mean, this is the guy you want to replace Putin? Come on. I mean, I think you better, wake up here and smell the roses. It just seems as though a part of the strategy of how you do great war, you must demonize the head of the other country. All right, and that's what they're doing to Putin. They did the same thing to Gaddafi. They did the same thing to Saddam Hussein. They've done that basically to the Ayatollah in Iran. They did it to Donald Trump here to get people to hate him so they could replace him. This is what you do. You demonize that person. Regardless of what they've done, you just pull out the stops. But now the downside of this, no president in history has ever demonized the head of another country like Russia or China. Why? Because how do you then negotiate peace? Oh, you're a war criminal. We're going to drag you out by the throat, blah, blah, blah. I mean, how do you now sit down with that person? You can't. So this is all deliberate. There is no return to normal here. And unfortunately, this is where we're headed. They needed to get rid of Trump because he was against this climate change. Next is Putin. They had to get him removed as well. And then the third is China. You can Google it, and I think Epoch Times covered, Soros came out and said, we have to remove Xi from power in China. Who the hell are these people? Talking about, throwing people out, etc. And then, there's an authoritarian rule. They don't. Look, Europe is authoritarian. The people do not get to vote for the head of state of Europe. They're also appointed by the other politicians. This is the way it is. I mean, the only system where the people actually pick who's going to run for the head office is in France.
Speaking of France, is Macron going to get knocked off by Le Pen?
Probably not.
What is
they're going to break the election to make sure he stays. But it's the people who decide. You have that first runoff, and then the second runoff, the last two stand. All right. There, at least the people are picking who's going to be there. We don't even get that in America. All right. The party decides who they're going to put up for president. It's not that we get to vote for absolutely everybody. And all this nonsense that, this is a democracy versus authoritarianism. We do not live in a democracy. We live in a republic. All right. We vote for only representatives. That's all. All right. And you can run for office for anything you want. And then what happens is then you get down there and they say, okay, fine, you're going to vote party line. That's the way this works down here. So you see these votes on no matter what it is. You see 100% Republicans, 100% Democrats, one way or the other. That's what they're told. So you can run for office and say, I'll give everybody a free popsicle. That's very nice. Okay. And you get down there and say, no, you're not. You're going to vote whatever we tell you to do.
Well, how bad is this going to get? I mean, if we may get war in the next few weeks, how bad is this going to get?
I think the war comes next year, probably starting maybe the first quarter of 23. But that's where we're headed. There's no question about it. They do not want, they're not interested in creating world peace anymore. They're just not. They need this to cover up the failures of basically deficit spending since 1945.